They say one stupid second can ruin your career, but nobody ever tells you it might also rewrite your heart. My name is Ethan Brooks, and if you had asked me that morning what the biggest danger at the annual Hayes Technologies Charity Gala would be, I would have guessed dropping a tray of sparkling water on one of our investors or accidentally calling the chief financial officer by the wrong name. I never would have guessed it would be kissing the CEO in front of 300 people. I wasn't even supposed to be there. The design department had spent weeks preparing interactive displays for the fundraiser, and because I was apparently the only person under 30 who knew how to reconnect a frozen presentation screen without crying, my manager volunteered me to stay through the evening. Lucky me. I spent the first 2 hours adjusting projectors, replacing dead tablet batteries, and pretending I belonged among people wearing watches that probably cost more than my student loans. Every few minutes, someone whispered the same name. Adrian Hayes, the youngest CEO in the company's history. Brilliant, untouchable, polite enough to never embarrass anyone, distant enough that nobody could honestly say they knew him. I'd seen him exactly 4 times in the past year, always from across a conference room, always looking perfectly composed in tailored charcoal suits that somehow made everyone else appear underdressed. Rumor claimed he remembered every employee's name. I doubted he remembered mine. I preferred it that way. Invisible employees rarely made spectacular mistakes. Then the ballroom lights dimmed for the opening presentation. My tablet buzzed with 3 urgent notifications at once. One display near the stage had gone offline. Another refused to load. Someone from marketing waved both arms at me like the building was on fire. I grabbed my equipment bag, apologized to at least 6 strangers while weaving through the crowd, and silently promised myself pizza the moment this nightmare ended. The polished marble floor looked beautiful until it met the sole of my dress shoe. My foot slid. My balance disappeared. Time stretched into something slow and painfully aware. I reached for anything that might keep me upright, but my hand found the sleeve of someone's jacket instead. Strong hands caught my shoulders before I completely fell. My momentum carried me forward anyway. For one impossible heartbeat, our faces were too close. My eyes squeezed shut from pure embarrassment, and then the room erupted into a chorus of shocked gasps. When I opened my eyes, Adrian Hayes was staring back at me from less than an inch away. I had accidentally kissed my boss. My brain immediately resigned from all professional responsibilities. Somewhere behind us, a camera shutter clicked. Then another. Then 20 more. Flash after flash turned the ballroom into a lightning storm of gossip. I stumbled backwards so quickly I nearly lost my balance again. "Mr. Hayes, I am so sorry," I blurted, already imagining the email from Human Resources, the security escort to the elevator, and my mother asking why I couldn't hold a normal office job for more than 18 months. Adrian didn't say anything right away. He simply looked at me with those calm gray eyes everyone in the company found intimidating. I waited for disappointment, for anger, for anything. Instead, the corner of his mouth moved almost imperceptibly, as if he had caught himself thinking something he refused to share. Then he glanced toward the photographers, back at me, and quietly said the last words I expected to hear. "Mr. Brooks, don't leave before I speak with you." Either Adrian Hayes had completely lost his mind, or I had walked into the strangest Tuesday of my life. The ballroom slowly returned to its elegant buzz, but every conversation seemed to stop the second I looked in its direction. People smiled too politely. They whispered too quietly. They definitely looked at me far too often. I spent the next 20 minutes pretending to adjust equipment that did not need adjusting, while mentally calculating how long it would take to update my resume. Maybe I could become a park ranger. Trees did not judge people for accidentally kissing their chief executive officer. At least I hoped they did not. My phone vibrated. Then again, and again. Our company group chat had apparently transformed into an investigative documentary. Someone had already posted a blurry photo from across the ballroom. Another employee had circled my face with a bright red marker as if nobody could identify the only person standing 3 inches from Adrian Hayes. My best friend, Olivia from accounting, sent exactly one message. "Please tell me that is not you." I typed 6 different replies before deleting every one of them. There was no version of the truth that sounded believable. A member of the event staff approached me with an apologetic smile. "Mr. Brooks, the chief executive officer would like to see you in the executive lounge." Well, this was it. My career had officially entered its farewell tour. The executive lounge overlooked the city through floor-to-ceiling windows. Everything inside looked expensive enough to require permission just to breathe near it. Adrian stood alone beside the glass with his suit jacket draped over one arm, reading something on a tablet. When I stepped inside, he looked up immediately. "Close the door, please." My stomach dropped somewhere around my dress shoes. I did exactly as instructed before blurting out the speech I had rehearsed at least 50 times. "I am incredibly sorry, sir. It was completely accidental. I understand if there are consequences." Adrian remained silent for a moment that felt several years long. Then, to my complete confusion, he asked, "Are you injured?" I blinked. "Excuse me. You slipped rather hard. That is what you were worried about." A faint smile almost appeared before disappearing again. Should I be worried about something else? My brain officially gave up trying to understand this man. Most people would probably start with the accidental kiss. Most people, Adrian replied calmly, care too much about headlines. He placed the tablet onto the conference table and folded his arms. "Mr. Brooks, I reviewed your project portfolio last month." That sentence hit me harder than the embarrassment ever could. "You reviewed my work?" "Yes." "Personally?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because I review promising employees." I stared at him, wondering if perhaps I had suffered a concussion after all. Before I could ask another question, the lounge door opened. Two senior vice presidents entered mid-conversation before stopping cold the second they saw me standing beside Adrian. The silence became almost physical. Adrian did not appear uncomfortable in the slightest. Instead, he addressed them with his usual composed voice. "Gentlemen, this is Ethan Brooks. Beginning tomorrow morning, he will join the Strategic Innovation Task Force." My heartbeat forgot how rhythm worked. One executive frowned in visible surprise. "Sir, I thought those positions had already been finalized." Adrian looked directly at him. "They were." I changed my mind. Then his gray eyes returned to me with quiet certainty. "Do not be late tomorrow, Mr. Brooks. We have important work to begin." The next morning, I stood outside the executive conference room holding a paper coffee cup that suddenly felt like emotional support in liquid form. I had barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flashing cameras, confused executives, and Adrian Hayes calmly changing the future of my career with one sentence. None of it made sense. I checked the email from Human Resources for at least the 10th time just to make sure it was real. "Welcome to the Strategic Innovation Task Force. Report at 8 o'clock sharp. Business attire required. Confidentiality agreement attached." No explanation. No warning. Just an invitation into a world I had never expected to enter. As I walked through headquarters, people greeted me differently. Some smiled too brightly. Others stopped talking the moment I approached. One marketing coordinator actually bumped into a hallway planter because he was staring at me instead of where he was walking. I wished I had inherited the magical ability to become invisible. Olivia caught up with me near the elevators carrying 2 coffees and an expression that demanded answers. "Tell me everything," she whispered dramatically. "Did he hypnotize you? Are you secretly related to him? Did you save his life and forget about it?" I accepted the extra coffee with genuine gratitude. "The only thing I have ever saved is a broken printer." She narrowed her eyes. "That man does not promote people overnight because they know how to replace toner." Unfortunately, I agreed with her. The conference room doors opened exactly at 8. 6 people were already seated around the polished walnut table, all senior managers or department directors whose names I recognized from company newsletters. Every single one of them looked at me with polite curiosity except one man in an expensive navy suit who looked openly irritated. His nameplate read Victor Lang, Director of Corporate Development. He glanced at the empty chair beside Adrian's reserved seat, then at me, before muttering just loudly enough to hear, "Interesting choice." I immediately wondered if it was socially acceptable to fake food poisoning. Before I could decide, Adrian entered carrying a slim folder and a travel mug. The room stood almost instantly. He acknowledged everyone with a brief nod before taking his seat. Then something even stranger happened. He looked toward the chair directly beside him. "Mr. Brooks," he said in his calm, measured voice, "that seat is yours. Mine." Not at the far end of the table where junior staff usually disappeared into the wallpaper. Beside the chief executive officer. Victor's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I sat carefully, convinced that if I moved too quickly, I might somehow knock over $1 billion business strategy. Adrian began the meeting without mentioning the gala or the awkward incident from the previous evening. Instead, he spoke about a confidential expansion project involving community technology centers across several states. His explanations were clear, thoughtful, and surprisingly easy to follow. Every few minutes, he asked someone for input. Then, halfway through the presentation, he turned toward me. "Mr. Brooks, you reviewed the user experience reports from our education initiative last quarter. What would you change?" 6 executives immediately shifted their attention toward me. My pulse tried to escape through my collar. How did he know I had written those reports? They had been submitted months ago through 3 different managers. I answered carefully, expecting him to correct me. Instead, Adrian listened without interrupting, asked 2 follow-up questions, and quietly wrote notes in the margin of his folder. When I finished, he simply said, "That is exactly the perspective we have been missing." Around the table, several expressions changed from curiosity to disbelief. Mine probably matched theirs. For the rest of the week, my calendar stopped looking like it belonged to a junior designer and started resembling the schedule of someone who had accidentally wandered into the wrong movie. Every morning, there was another executive meeting. Every afternoon, there was another brainstorming session. Every evening, there was another stack of confidential reports waiting on my desk. Somewhere between all of that, I was apparently still expected to perform my actual job. I was beginning to suspect sleep had become an optional lifestyle choice. The strangest part was not the workload. It was Adrian. He never hovered. He never praised people simply to sound encouraging. He also never treated me like a mascot for some public relations stunt. Instead, he kept asking for my opinion with the same calm certainty he showed everyone else, except it happened far more often than anyone seemed comfortable with. During one meeting about community outreach, he slid a printed proposal across the table toward me before anyone else had seen it. "Read the second page first," he said quietly. "I think you will notice something we missed." I frowned, scanned the document, and within seconds found a flaw in the accessibility plan for small rural schools. Adrian nodded once after I explained it. "Exactly." Around the table, several executives exchanged quick glances. Victor Lang leaned back in his chair with crossed arms and an expression that suggested he had just bitten into a lemon. After the meeting ended, I gathered my notebook as quickly as possible, hoping to escape before anyone asked uncomfortable questions. Naturally, that plan lasted approximately 4 seconds. Victor stepped into the hallway beside me with a professional smile that somehow felt colder than the office air conditioning. "You are adjusting rather quickly," he observed. "I am trying my best." "Interesting," he replied. "Most people spend years earning the chief executive officer's attention." Before I could think of a response, Adrian appeared from the conference room, carrying 2 folders. "Mr. Brooks," he called. "Walk with me." Victor stepped aside immediately. I followed Adrian through the executive corridor, wondering whether I should apologize for existing. Instead of discussing budgets or deadlines, he asked, "How are you settling in?" I blinked. Honestly, I prefer honesty. I feel like everyone expects me to explain something I do not understand myself. Adrian was quiet for a few moments as we continued walking past offices overlooking downtown Chicago. "People often search for complicated answers," he finally said. "Sometimes the simplest explanation is the correct one." I looked at him curiously. "And what is the simple explanation?" He opened a conference room door and held it for me before answering. "You consistently produce thoughtful work." I value thoughtful work. It sounded perfectly reasonable. It also somehow raised even more questions. That afternoon, the task force received notice that we would be traveling to Denver the following week to present the expansion proposal to regional partners. Before anyone else could volunteer, Adrian looked directly at me. "Mr. Brooks, you will accompany me. Your research will be important during the presentation." The room fell noticeably quieter. Even Olivia, who had stopped by to deliver financial projections, stared at me with eyes wide enough to qualify as a medical condition. I wanted to remind everyone that I had been part of this project for less than 1 week. Instead, I simply nodded and tried to ignore the growing feeling that every step Adrian took seemed to pull me farther into a story I had never intended to become part of. By the time our flight to Denver boarded the following Monday morning, I had developed a brand new professional skill. I could now recognize the exact moment an entire room decided to invent rumors about me without saying a single word. It usually started with raised eyebrows, continued with suspicious smiles, and ended with someone pretending to check their phone while very obviously listening to my conversation. Airports, I discovered, were no different. Our team gathered near the gate while discussing presentation schedules. Victor stood with two senior managers reviewing financial projections. Olivia waved at me from the security line before dramatically mouthing, "Good luck," as if I were marching into battle instead of boarding a 2-hour flight. Then Adrian arrived carrying nothing more than a slim leather briefcase and a cup of black coffee. Conversations shifted almost automatically. He greeted everyone with the same calm professionalism before stopping beside me. "Good morning, Mr. Brooks." "Good morning, sir." He glanced toward the boarding screen. "Have you had breakfast?" I blinked. "A blueberry muffin." He looked mildly unconvinced. "That explains why you appear to be surviving rather than functioning." Before I could respond, he quietly handed me a small paper bag. The lounge packed an extra sandwich. It would be unfortunate to lose our best researcher to poor planning. I accepted it on instinct, then spent the next 10 seconds wondering whether chief executive officers normally carried emergency sandwiches for junior employees. Judging by the expressions around us, the answer was no. During boarding, I naturally headed toward economy seating with everyone else from the task force. Halfway down the aisle, a flight attendant smiled politely. "Mr. Brooks, your seat has been updated." "Updated?" She checked her tablet. "Seat 2 Alpha." I stared at my boarding pass. That was the front of the aircraft. I walked forward in complete confusion until I found Adrian already reading a report beside the window. The empty seat next to him carried my name. He looked up as I approached. "Please sit. We have several documents to review before landing." Across the aisle, I noticed Victor watching us with an unreadable expression before taking his own seat 3 rows behind. My internal panic decided frequent flyer miles should count as cardio. Throughout the flight, Adrian discussed presentation strategy, asked thoughtful questions about community engagement, and listened carefully whenever I offered an idea. There was never anything improper about his behavior. In fact, he treated every conversation with quiet professionalism. Yet I slowly began noticing something that refused to leave my mind. Whenever another executive answered a question, Adrian nodded politely. Whenever I answered, he actually wrote notes. During lunch, he thanked the flight attendant for everyone's meals. Then he turned toward me and asked whether I preferred sparkling water or iced tea before making his own choice. At the hotel, he distributed room assignments. Mine happened to be on the executive floor, directly across from his suite because, according to the reservation list, it would make early morning meetings more efficient. By dinner, I had stopped trying to convince myself these were random coincidences. They formed a pattern that everyone else seemed to notice before I did. Later that evening, as I waited for the elevator, I overheard 2 regional directors speaking quietly around the corner. "He keeps choosing Brooks," one of them whispered. "Every single time." The other replied, "That is exactly what worries me." The elevator doors opened before I could hear anything else, but those words followed me all the way to my room, because for the first time I realized I was no longer asking why everyone was staring at me. I was starting to ask the same question they were. The presentation the next morning went far better than I expected, which somehow made everything feel even stranger. The regional partners loved the proposal. The questions were thoughtful instead of hostile, and for nearly 2 hours I forgot about whispered conversations and suspicious glances because I was too busy explaining research data and answering questions from school administrators. Every time I finished speaking, Adrian gave the slightest nod, never dramatic enough for anyone to call attention to it, yet somehow more encouraging than a standing ovation. It was the kind of quiet confidence that made me believe I belonged in the room, even while I continued wondering how I had ended up there in the first place. After the meeting concluded, everyone gathered in the hotel restaurant for a late lunch before returning to Chicago. I excused myself for a few minutes to get fresh air on the rooftop terrace overlooking the Denver skyline. The mountain air was cooler than I expected, carrying the faint scent of rain that never quite arrived. I leaned against the railing, replaying the past week in my head. One accidental moment had somehow turned into executive meetings, business flights, confidential projects, and a chief executive officer who seemed determined to keep placing me at the center of everything important. None of it added up. Beautiful view, isn't it? A familiar voice said behind me. I turned to find Eleanor Whitmore, one of the company's board advisors. She was in her early 60s, elegantly dressed, with the calm confidence of someone who had seen every corporate mystery imaginable. She joined me at the railing with a warm smile. You handled yourself well today, Ethan. Thank you. I am still trying to convince myself this week is real. She laughed softly. That feeling passes eventually. I looked toward the city below before asking the question that had been haunting me for days. Can I ask you something? Of course. Why does Mr. Hayes keep choosing me? Eleanor did not answer immediately. Instead, she studied the skyline for several quiet seconds. That is an interesting question, she finally said. Especially because most people assume it started at the gala. My heartbeat stumbled. What do you mean? She looked genuinely surprised. You do not know? Know what? Eleanor smiled with quiet amusement. Adrian requested your quarterly design reports nearly 6 months ago. I stared at her, convinced I had misheard. 6 months. He personally asked for every project you completed involving community education. That was long before anyone heard about your little, unexpected public moment. My thoughts stopped cooperating. 6 months earlier, I had barely exchanged 2 sentences with Adrian. I had never presented directly to him. I had never even been inside the executive offices without getting lost. There must be some mistake, I said quietly. Eleanor shook her head. Adrian does not make many mistakes. Before I could ask another question, someone opened the terrace door. Adrian stepped outside, his expression as composed as ever. Our transportation will arrive in 10 minutes, he said politely. Eleanor glanced at me with an expression I could not quite read before walking back inside. I remained standing there, unable to move. Adrian had not started paying attention to me because of one embarrassing accident. According to someone who had served on the board for over 20 years, he had been paying attention long before I even knew he remembered my name. The flight back to Chicago should have given me 2 peaceful hours to organize my thoughts, but my brain apparently preferred collecting impossible questions instead. Eleanor's words replayed on an endless loop. 6 months. Adrian had been reading my reports for 6 months. Every explanation I had carefully built over the past week collapsed under that single fact. I had convinced myself the gala changed everything. Instead, it seemed the gala had merely exposed something that had already been quietly unfolding behind the scenes. I found myself staring out the airplane window while the clouds drifted beneath us like scattered pieces of unfinished conversations. You are unusually quiet today, Adrian said beside me without looking up from the document in his hands. I laughed softly. I am trying very hard not to ask questions that probably belong in someone else's autobiography. That finally earned the faintest smile. An interesting strategy. Is it working? Not particularly. I looked at him for a moment before deciding against asking what Eleanor had told me. Something stopped me. It was not fear exactly. It was the strange feeling that if I asked too soon, I might receive an answer I was not ready to hear. Back at headquarters, the atmosphere had changed again. Rumors no longer whispered through hallways. They practically scheduled meetings. Employees greeted me with careful politeness, but conversations always paused whenever I entered a room. Even the coffee machine seemed judgmental. Olivia leaned against my cubicle carrying 2 folders and one expression that suggested she had been waiting all afternoon. You survived the trip. Barely. Did anything happen? Depends on your definition of anything. She lowered her voice dramatically. Corporate development has been asking questions about you all day. That sentence settled uncomfortably in my stomach. Questions. Who approved your appointment? Why you were selected? Whether your promotion followed normal procedures. She sighed. Mostly they seem upset that nobody can explain why the chief executive officer keeps choosing you. Before I could answer, another email appeared in my inbox marked high priority. Emergency executive meeting. Attendance required. 30 minutes later, I sat once again beside Adrian in the largest boardroom I had ever entered. Around the polished table sat department heads, board advisors, and senior executives whose combined experience probably exceeded my age several times over. Victor Lang stood to present first. His presentation appeared polished, carefully prepared, and surprisingly centered on staffing decisions instead of project results. Without mentioning me directly, he questioned whether recent personnel changes reflected appropriate executive governance. Every sentence sounded professional. Every implication pointed toward me. When he finally finished, Silence settled across the room. Adrian closed the folder in front of him with calm precision. Does anyone have concerns regarding Mr. Brooks' qualifications? No one answered. Adrian continued. His research increased community engagement projections by 18%. His accessibility recommendations were adopted unanimously in Denver. Every contribution has strengthened this initiative. Victor folded his hands. Respectfully, that is not the issue. Adrian met his gaze without raising his voice. Then clarify the issue. Victor hesitated for the first time since the meeting began. People are questioning why one junior employee has received so much personal attention. The room became perfectly still. Adrian did not look irritated. He did not appear defensive. He simply answered with quiet certainty. Because I believe exceptional work deserves exceptional opportunity. His words settled over the room with remarkable finality. Nobody challenged him again. Yet as the meeting ended and executives quietly gathered their documents, I noticed Victor watching both of us with an expression that promised this conversation was far from over. After that meeting, I could no longer pretend nothing had changed. Adrian had defended my work in front of the most influential people in the company without raising his voice once. Yet somehow his quiet confidence carried more weight than any dramatic speech ever could. Unfortunately, his support also made me the center of attention in ways I never wanted. The following morning, my inbox looked like it had developed a personality disorder. Half the messages congratulated me on becoming one of the company's rising talents. The other half politely questioned whether I had somehow skipped 5 years of corporate hierarchy overnight. Neither group actually knew me. They only knew the story they had invented. I spent most of the day reviewing proposals for the education initiative, determined to prove that Adrian's confidence had not been misplaced. By late afternoon, my desk had disappeared beneath charts, survey data, and enough sticky notes to qualify as modern art. A gentle knock interrupted my concentration. I looked up to find Adrian standing outside my office with his suit jacket folded neatly over one arm. "Would you join me for a walk?" he asked. "Now, if you have a few minutes." We left the building through a quiet side entrance and crossed the small public park behind headquarters. Early autumn had painted the trees shades of gold and deep orange. Office workers hurried past with coffee cups while children laughed near a fountain several yards away. It felt strangely normal compared with executive boardrooms and endless speculation. For several minutes, we simply walked without speaking. Finally, I broke the silence. "May I ask you something?" Adrian nodded. "You may ask me anything." I took a slow breath. "Why did you really choose me?" He did not answer immediately. Instead, he watched a few leaves drift across the path before speaking. "Because you solve problems most people never notice." I smiled faintly. "That sounds like something you would tell the board." He glanced toward me, and for the first time since I had met him, his expression softened in a way that almost erased the distance everyone associated with the chief executive officer. "Very well," he said quietly. "Several years ago, our company sponsored a weekend workshop at a neighborhood community center on the south side of Chicago. You volunteered there while you were still finishing graduate school." I stopped walking. The memory returned almost instantly. A small computer lab, teenagers learning graphic design, broken projectors, cold pizza, long afternoons that never appeared on anyone's resume. "You were there?" I asked in disbelief. Adrian nodded. "You did not recognize me because I arrived late and left early. One of the computers failed during the workshop. Everyone focused on the schedule. You focused on the students who thought they would lose their projects." I remembered spending nearly an hour recovering files because several teenagers had worked all week on their presentations. It had never seemed like a remarkable thing to do. "That was years ago," I said quietly. "Yes." Adrian looked ahead again. "Most people noticed the inconvenience. You noticed the people affected by it." I remembered that. I searched his face for any sign that he might be joking, but found only calm sincerity. "So the gala changed nothing?" "It changed one thing," he admitted. "It forced me to stop pretending that recommending you for greater responsibility could wait until next year." Before I could process those words, my phone vibrated with an urgent company alert. Someone had anonymously leaked claims that my appointment to the Strategic Innovation Task Force had been based on favoritism rather than merit, and the rumor was already spreading through the entire organization. The rumor spread faster than any official announcement ever could, but unlike the stories people had invented before, this one carried enough confidence to sound believable. By the following morning, anonymous messages questioned my qualifications, suggested I had received special treatment, and implied that the Strategic Innovation Task Force had become a personal project rather than a professional one. I read exactly 3 comments before closing the browser. There was nothing to gain from arguing with strangers who had already decided who I was. Instead, I opened my laptop and drafted a resignation letter. It was surprisingly easy to write. I thanked the company for every opportunity, expressed my appreciation for the remarkable people I had worked with, and explained that I never wanted my presence to distract from a project designed to help communities across the country. If leaving protected the initiative, then leaving seemed like the right thing to do. I printed the letter, folded it carefully, and walked toward Adrian's office with a strange sense of peace. His assistant smiled as always and quietly invited me inside. Adrian looked up from his desk the moment I entered. "You seem unusually determined today," he observed. I placed the envelope in front of him. "I think this is the best solution." He opened it, read the first page without changing expression, then set it down with deliberate care. "No," he said simply. I blinked. "Sir, the rumors are hurting the project. The rumors are hurting people who prefer speculation over evidence. If I leave, everything becomes easier." Adrian stood and walked to the window overlooking the city. "For whom?" he asked quietly. I did not answer because I already knew the truth. It would become easier for everyone except the students we were trying to help, the team we had built, and perhaps the 2 people standing in that office. After a long silence, Adrian turned toward me. "Ethan, I have spent years searching for people who notice others before they notice themselves. That weekend at the community center confirmed what your reports later proved. You think about people before recognition. You solve problems without asking who will receive the credit. I chose you because character is more difficult to find than talent." My throat tightened. "Then why never tell me?" A faint smile appeared. "Because I believe the opportunity should speak before I did." I laughed softly despite everything. "That sounds exactly like something you would say." "Probably." He stepped closer, stopping at a respectful distance. "The gala did not create my opinion of you. It merely interrupted my carefully planned timeline. For the first time since this impossible journey began, neither of us felt the need to pretend the truth was purely professional." The room remained quiet, comfortable rather than awkward. "So what happens now?" I asked. Adrian glanced toward the resignation letter before sliding it back across the desk unopened beyond the first page. "Now we finish the work we started." 6 months later, the education initiative launched successfully across multiple states, earning recognition for the entire company. The rumors faded because consistent results proved stronger than gossip ever could. My title changed from junior designer to director of community experience, but the promotion felt less important than the purpose behind it. Most mornings I still arrived early with coffee in one hand and far too many notes in the other. On one ordinary Monday, during a leadership meeting filled with executives who had long since accepted my place at the table, someone quietly set a fresh cup of coffee beside my notebook before taking the seat next to mine. Adrian did not say a word. He simply glanced toward the presentation screen as the meeting began. I smiled without thinking. Out of everyone in the room, he had chosen my favorite coffee again, and this time I finally understood that he had been choosing me long before either of us had found the courage to admit why.